Shapes and Sounds acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands on which we're recording and connecting with you from, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. Hello, Marcus. Hello, Oscar.
Hello.
Welcome back to Season 2 of the Asian Mental Health Podcast.
Woo!
Yay! Insert applause here. So how are you both?
Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah.
made
Bit
it.
nervous again.
Yeah,
I know,
same,
right?
same.
I think episode 1 is always like a bit like
Yeah.
nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Well, for us, I feel like season 1 just ended because we had to like edit it and, put it onto the internet and all that kind of stuff. In that time though, between season 1 and today, I think like one thing that we did as a team was release the Creative Community Care, our creative arts therapy workshops, which was awesome. But what have you been doing, Marcus?
Just the same old, I think. Just like going to uni. I had a month off. But yeah, I didn't do much during that time off as well. I just like gonna work, and then now I'm back at uni, so it's just the same.
I'm back at work again.
Yep.
Yeah, honestly, I'm the same. Like I went to uni, I did work. I mean, recently I've had a bunch of Japanese people staying at my house, which has been weird because you look around at Melbourne and they want to see stuff and you go, oh, like what is there to see in Melbourne?
Yeah.
There's nothing to see in Melbourne. There's like it's not the place to be going on a holiday. So
It's like fun to live, but
yeah.
Yeah.
It's I was drawing a blank. I was like, I don't know what to do here.
Yeah.
But would you say like, okay, you didn't know where to take them, but did your Japanese get better because you got to practice your Japanese?
No, absolutely not.
Welcome to the Asian Mental Health Podcast, brought to you by Shapes and Sounds. Well, that is a shame about your Japanese, Oscar. I feel like you and I need to practice more, but we never do. We never ever speak in Japanese. That's weird, right?
We should.
We definitely should.
And then make Marcus feel really left out.
Yeah.
Just like have a conversation.
Marcus does speak Japanese unnecessarily though, like the strange Japanese work phrases that we
Yeah,
like
that
two
we've embedded
phrases.
into him.
right? Okay, well, apart from our Japanese conversations, let's talk about this season, yeah? So after season 1, we had a few conversations and we were really thinking about like, what are we doing? What do we want it to be like? What do we want the podcast to be like? And what we really discovered was that season 1, we want it to act like a resource for you. It's like a library. It's got all these terms and like how to go to therapy and all the different kinds of therapy, and all of these key mental health terms and conversations are living there in season 1. But we decided for season 2, we really wanted to shift gears a little, and rather than just giving you like the how-tos, we wanted to bring in more conversations as a team. We want you to get a feel for the Shapes and Sounds team. I feel like you two are very, very interesting. So
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know about that one.
we'll soon find out, right? Through
Yeah.
season 2.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it's going to be more conversational. For us, we're all about destigmatizing mental health in Asian communities. And I think just being able to demonstrate like having conversations and open conversations about our mental health and what we do to take care of ourselves, I think that feeds into that puzzle as well. But for this episode, for episode 1, we're going to start with like a little bit of heavier content just to set the scene. And the reason why I want to do this is like, don't you find sometimes that in these conversations about the Asian diaspora and Asian mental health, there's like this surface level conversation that we have, like it's important, but we're constantly talking about parental expectations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like the whole, the analogy with the cut fruit, and my parents don't tell me they love me, but they cut me fruit.
Yes.
Like it's important, but we've heard that
I
conversation
know.
so many
So
times.
bored of it.
And the fruit, right? It's all about the fruit. But
Yep.
okay, we get it. And we did a lot of that in season 1. But for us at Shapes and Sounds, like we are a mental health team, and our work is grounded in, like I think these kind of things like the cut fruit conversation, they're really important. But at the same time, the negative stigma that surrounds mental health in Asian communities, it has actual like really life-threatening and dire consequences for a lot of people. A lot of people really struggle in silence, and we just need to like anchor this season and all of our episodes and all our conversations in this fact. So as a bit of a content warning, just know that for the next 10 minutes, just to start this season, we're going to have some conversations about suicide. And if that's just not what you're interested in hearing about today, if that's just not appropriate for you, then please maybe just skip ahead for, let's say, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And you'll be back to our other conversation later on in the episode. But the thing that I want to start this episode on is last year there was a coroner's inquest that looked into the deaths of 5 international students, and those international students were from Asia. And essentially, it's a really confronting inquest. I'm sorry that I made both of you read it, but I think it's like important as well. What it found, or what I thought was really interesting, 2 points that I thought was interesting was that one, it highlighted that yes, there's a lot of stigma in Asian communities, but there are no services in Australia that address that stigma, right? That's point number 1. Point number 2 that I thought was really interesting was that these young people that died by suicide, no one else knew that they were unwell. Like they hadn't touched into any mental health services, any support services. Essentially, no one knew that they were unwell. And I think that's really concerning. But let's just circle back to point 1.
Yeah.
About, like that stigma that exists, and also like how no one's addressing the stigma.
Yeah, I think one main thing that really jumped out at me when I read the inquest was that 14.8% only 14.8% of the international students who suicided had diagnosed mental health illnesses. So 14.8%, that's probably like one of them, maybe one out of the 5. I don't know.
Okay.
Or maybe not. I don't know.
Oh, as in like diagnosed, like someone knew that they were unwell.
Yeah. So yeah, like I guess going back to what you said, like no one really knew that they were unwell, and like no one caught on to these issues, and like maybe they were just like suffering in silence. But on the other hand, 2/3 of the domestic student suicides had diagnosed mental health illnesses. So like there was some sort of indication for other people that like they were unwell, that they perhaps needed like access to support for their mental health. So I don't know. I guess like I'm not trying to say that like with the diagnosis it would have helped prevent this. Like obviously it still happened, but I guess just showing that like the difference in like that statistic is showing that like the stigma is so ingrained in the international student community, and like perhaps like with more access to services, or like services that were able to pick up on these sort of diagnoses earlier, then they could have gotten better help earlier, and it could have prevented the thing. Like maybe, but obviously you don't know. So
yeah, you don't know, but it's like we get this not anecdotal, like this gut feeling, right? Like,
yeah.
it's not just within the international student cohort, but we know from the people that we work with at Shapes and Sounds, our peers, our families, like we know how pervasive that stigma is that stops people from seeking help.
Definitely.
And I would say that relates to that second point, right? Like about how no one knew at all that these people were unwell until they died, which is so severe.
Yeah. I remember in the inquest as well, it was saying, I think it was for the most recent suicide, that like after that happened, they spoke to the housemate of that person. And I think it was after that whole thing happened, then the housemate was saying like, oh yeah, thinking back to that night that it happened, I could like kind of hear that like they were sort of talking on the phone like louder than usual to like their mom or something. I think it was something about like they didn't want to study here anymore or something like that. So like thinking back, there were signs, but then just no one picked up on it. And I guess maybe for the person who did commit suicide, like they didn't feel safe enough to reach out and talk about these issues as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Like it's like a two-way street,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You need to have someone that you can trust
Yep.
to be able to open up and have conversations with as well. Yeah. Yeah. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to this, before we move on?
Yeah, part of the inquest as well, I think it mentioned, or maybe it wasn't the inquest, maybe it was like a report from Origin, but it mentioned why the international students weren't accessing mental health services, and this was like self-reported by the international students. So 37% of them said they did not have enough time, 36% of them said they weren't sure where to go, and 29% of them said the cost of services would be too much. So I think we'll touch on like the cost of services a bit later, but yeah, I guess like even just like the reason of like being unsure of where to go is like that shouldn't be a thing. Like why are we letting these people like not know where to access services and stuff?
Yeah, it's a barrier to entry that could definitely be overcome, like with, you know, not too much effort. Like
Yeah,
to be able to
exactly.
refer to resources is very important.
Exactly.
Well, I feel like that's a great way to kind of wrap up this conversation as well. Like this is the bit that we just wanted to anchor our conversation in first, right? And all we want to say is like, it is so important to talk about, it's not even your mental health. It's like, just talk about yourself and make sure you're connecting out with others and make sure that people know what is going on with you, like good things as well. That's important too. And we hope that this podcast like serves as a bit of a way for you to connect in. Maybe it gives you ideas about how you can talk about your mental health too. Or maybe even if you just share this podcast with people that you know, obviously that's good for us if you share the podcast, full disclosure. But you never know, like sometimes people can just see that on your socials and be like, oh, maybe, you know, it's okay to talk about mental health.
Yep.
And that can be really life-changing for a lot of people. So we went through some of those stats and some of those findings from the coroner's inquest, and that really highlighted how many people of Asian identities, not just international students, but people of Asian identities, we don't reach out for help. Maybe that's because of the stigma. Maybe there's other stuff going on too. But what about you two? Like, do you feel like you both actively reach out for help, or do you keep things a lot to yourself, like when things are hard?
I think for me personally, I try and like deal with things alone first. But when I realize like, you know, if I'm feeling overwhelmed at that point, then I do try and like reach out to my support network, reach out to people I know. And, you know, just like go through the motions of just like, you know, sometimes talking to other people really like helps you put perspective on everything and also just relieves a bit of the stress. I know like as soon as I've said something, like I don't have to think about it as much because it's like kind of, it's not here anymore. So I think, yeah, a bit of both.
I'm like you. I think I always have to tidy it up first.
Same.
Yeah?
I'm definitely the same as well. Like I think, yeah, naturally I'll just try to deal with it myself, and I don't think I'll like reach out to someone just to talk about it. Like I'll just like be interacting with them, and in the conversation I might bring it up, but like I'll never reach out and be like, oh, this is happening, it's really stressing me out, just like start a new conversation like that. Like
Yeah, right.
I don't think I would do that, but it definitely helps a lot by like reaching out to other people, especially like I find like in honors, like because everyone else is also so stressed, like, and I don't know, just like speaking to other people really helped me change my perspective on like how to manage the stress as well. So
Yeah.
Yeah, because everyone has their own piece of information about it. It's for a lot of things, you know, you're not the first person to have experienced it. So then being able to talk to people and realizing, you know, oh, I'm not the only one who's faced this before.
Yeah.
And then also having someone who's maybe got experience with those issues, it's like they might actually have tips that really help you. So it's really important to reach out to other people and, you know, see what they're doing.
What do you both think about that though? Like, oh, I kind of have to deal with it first myself and make sure it's like palatable. And that's me, but I don't want to speak for you both. But you know what I mean? Like that, like, do you think we should be like, oh, I feel stressed, I'm going to reach out? Like it should be faster?
I don't know. Like for me, I know it's coming from a point where I don't want to burden other people.
Yeah.
Like I know like for a fact, and I'm very self-aware of that, and it's probably not so good for myself. But yeah, just like can't help but like try to deal with it myself, because I'm like why would I want to like unload all this stuff onto other people just randomly, you know? So yeah, definitely comes from
Yeah.
that fear for me.
Do you have friends though that will just unload?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's not completely unhealthy. I mean,
Yeah.
if you've
Yeah.
got friends that
Exactly.
you've had for a long time and you're very comfortable having these conversations, then it's like, I know with certain friends that I have, like I'm very open to just be like, I'm just like, how have you been? Oh, I'm having a shit time. And
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about
Yep.
what's going on,
Yep.
and most likely they're going through something as well, and then being able to mutually talk through whatever issues you're going through. I think that's healthy. I think that really helps people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
Like we always talk about go to therapy, but there's no denying the fact that therapy costs money, and the costs of mental health care are so inaccessible to so many. Both of you are students. You both work at Shapes and Sounds. You're part-time as well. I'm part-time too. And you're both students. Like, how do you take care of your mental health, like when considering the costs?
Mm. Well, I guess a lot of it comes from like being able to like live at home as well. So like that saves a lot of like costs as well. And there's like the free services at uni. So like I've accessed that before and they're like pretty good. So like I think that's a good starting point and they can usually refer you to like other places as well. Um, but yeah, just like generally doing other things that like don't cost money, I guess, like
Yeah.
going to the beach or something. I don't know, just like find what works for you. And like I find that like going to the beach really works for me. So
That's so
yeah.
peaceful. I like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, no, I'm the same. I think like, do what you can with what you can control. And I mean, once you've figured out sort of what helps you and like, some of the things that help me are definitely some of the stuff we've already touched upon, like talking with friends or just, enjoying other people's company. It really helps with just like, I don't know, keeping sure that you're okay or making sure you're okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Like there's lots of things that you can do
Yeah.
that are free.
Yeah.
that
And of course,
still
like,
are supportive.
yeah. And of course, like the basic stuff as well, like sleep, eat.
Yeah, for sure.
All of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hydrate.
Hydrate. The one thing I'm very poor at.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I also wanted to ask you, in reflection, since season 1, a few months have passed, have there been any themes or ideas about mental health that have really like kind of come to your forefront? Like, for example, for me, I think that the cost of living pressures tied in with mental health, like that is such a big conversation at the moment. And it just really highlights like how much systemic factors play into an individual's mental health. Like we often think mental health is like inside my own brain, but actually like people feel so stressed and so unwell right now because there's just so much financial pressure, right? And you go to the supermarket, you buy like one bag of groceries and it's like $100. I don't know why. It's so expensive. But it's like it makes sense that that would be so stressful. And if we had removed that stressor, then individually we wouldn't feel so pushed as well, right? So that's a real theme that I don't know, I think is really prominent for so many of us and that really plays into our mental health. But yeah, what about you?
I mean, yeah, I've been thinking about what I always think about, what I've talked about last season, but I'll continue to talk about
Yeah, please do.
social media and its intersection with mental health. I think it's like the thing that everyone's talking about at the moment. I've seen so many people talk about, how social media is playing into their mental health. I think it's something that has become really prominent recently because the effects have become really pronounced. That being said, I think there is some parts of that conversation which I think still are lacking, and I think it's to do with what does that mean for people of specific cultures? Like how does that affect Asian people? How does that affect people from a clinical point of view, like a psychologist point of view? What's actually happening when you engage with social media? There's just so much to think about there, and
like so bot heavy as well. That's like pulling the algorithm in all different ways, right?
Algorithm is just like a whole
crazy.
Yeah,
whole
that's
episode.
a whole episode worth of speaking. But yeah, even for me, it's just like everyone talks about doom scrolling. Like I've realized, especially for me, like when you're consuming content all the time, it's like we don't actually have time to reflect on ourselves, check in with how we're going. And I think that is really essentially for me, like one of the biggest parts about this whole mental health intersection with social media. It's that we don't get the time to think about how we're feeling because we're always consuming. And that this is going to be a really random tie-in, to be honest. This is like a random reference, but in urban planning and architecture, there's this idea of the third space. So, you know, the first and second space might be home and work, but third places are like somewhere that like a park or a library, somewhere where you go to enjoy, like a different location, you know? And I think like similarly that we can, you know, talk about a third time almost. There's like a sort of a loss of this third time for us where we don't have this time where we, you know, sit on the tram and think to ourselves and reflect on what's going on. You know, it's like, you know, we're not on the tram anymore. We don't have that time in the shower because we're listening to music, for example. Like I love music. I'm on, you know, the tram or the train and I'm always listening to music and you
like
know,
always something, right?
Yeah,
a podcast,
you're always
a video.
Yeah, you're always tuned in. You're always tapped into something.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like essentially a really big part of like, you know, my mental health is like, if you don't purposely like realize, oh, like this is happening, you don't have the time then to like check in with yourself. And then in that way, it's sort of like a self-repeating cycle because then you're not like going to check in on yourself because you don't have the time to reflect on yourself, being like, oh, I'm not checking in on myself. You know? So it's this really like self-eating whirlpool of like strangeness. I don't know. Social media's just been
and
strange.
avoidance of yourself.
Yeah. And it's so
Interesting.
randomly malicious. You don't realize. Yeah.
That actually ties in so well to what I've been thinking of, like the idea of like we constantly have to be doing something and like be like tapped into something. The idea of like mental health, how that intersects with like productivity and like especially like a capitalist idea of what productivity looks like. I don't know, it's just like I mean, like we discussed it in last season as well. Like everything is capitalist at this point. Like even the skincare stuff as well.
I put on a face mask yesterday.
I was like, oh, capitalist. Well, yeah, like I don't know, just like the idea that like we constantly have to be doing something and like we don't have the time to like think and reflect or just like live. Like we can't just like exist and be okay existing doing nothing anymore. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's actually what that original third places thing is. I wish I could pull up the guy's name who came up with this idea, but the original thesis was that like third spaces are disappearing, especially across the US, because less people are engaging with parks and libraries, which means that the funding towards them decreases, and eventually they just turn into like, you know, car parks or whatever. So it's like this sort of decrease in places to actually live is also, I guess, like a sign of the times, you know, a sign of like, you know, productivity over actually lifestyle, you know?
Yeah.
So
and
sad.
Isn't it also the third place is about community as well? That you have actually people in your life that aren't just your family or colleagues, but you actually have a different kind of community.
Yeah, exactly.
And then without those spaces, you lose that other community. Yeah. Well, I feel like that's definitely me. All I do is work and home.
Yeah.
Luckily, I have wonderful colleagues such as yourself. And I think that's a nice segue into what we're going to be talking about this season as well. This season, we want to shed a light on the team and what we individually do to take care of our mental health and our well-being. This was inspired by Marcus, so you'll hear all about Marcus. We've got a bit of a focus on men's mental health as well coming up throughout the season. We also want to talk about creativity and mental health. I think that's going to come up in the season. And lastly, we have a few special guests, very special guests as well. So there's a lot to look forward to in season 2. But for now, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We cannot wait to share the podcast with you this time around. Please be sure to like and follow and download all of our episodes on your favorite streaming platform. Be sure to follow us at Just Shapes and Sounds on Instagram or other socials. And like we shared earlier, please share this podcast with your friends. Please join us in trying to destigmatize and normalize mental health conversations in Asian communities. I think sharing it is like a really easy way to do so. And other than that, we're really excited for this season. We've got a new studio. Everything's looking good, I think. I hope. Fingers crossed.
Yep.
And we'll see you in our next episode. This is a production from Shapes and Sounds. It's hosted by Asami Koike, Marcus Lai, and Oscar Abe, and produced by Yo Chung. We're proudly supported by the Victorian Department of Health's Diverse Communities program. All thoughts and ideas you hear are independently ours and our guests.